a little bit later. A few years ago, my grandmother gave me this crayon-colored picture. It's one I gave her. And I treasure this drawing because she saved it for decades. She said, "I asked you what was in the sky, and you said, God." And if you didn't catch it, up in the corner is God with a smiling face and kind of a semblance of a body moving, surrounded by puffy clouds, just above a red brick church. Now, I can honestly say I don't remember coloring this picture, but it got me wondering, what had I been told about God? How did I experience God as a child? And how might that experience be different today? So today we're going to talk about the nature of God. Not a little topic. We're going to talk about how we grow in our understanding of God. Marcus Borg, the author of The God We Never Knew, suggests that we grow from a monarchical understanding of God into a spirit understanding of God. Today we'll also talk about how our self-perceptions relate to our God perceptions. We may go back and forth with the lights. You probably recognize this painting by Michelangelo. In 1506, Pope Julius II asked Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo didn't want to do it. He had been disappointed with some past interactions with the Pope, and he told the Pope that he wouldn't return to Rome. He went on further to say he was primarily a sculptor. He wasn't comfortable painting frescoes, and besides, who would want to paint on a vaulted ceiling? The Pope sent letters, multiple letters, emissaries to Michelangelo's home. And how do you say no to the Pope? Michelangelo, of course, did paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And instead of the 12 figures that the Pope suggested, Michelangelo painted more than 300 figures, including God and the creation of Adam. We recognize this painting because God is portrayed as an elderly white man with a white beard in the sky, surrounded by naked angels, reaching out to give the spark of life to Adam, as if Adam's kind of limp, waiting for this spark. In reality, Michelangelo painted this and created the design, but the Pope and his theologians provided the content, the subject matter. So did Michelangelo also see God as a monarch? And how does this monarchical model of God relate to our self-image? Well, we may each experience changes in our concept of God through our lives or at any moment in our lives. First of all, we're talking about ourselves, not about those people in the church down the block. Because although some of us see ourselves as having outgrown this concept, we all have vestiges of this concept because we're human. When we identify with a monarch God, life becomes about performing. Deepak Chopra links our earliest understanding of God to our fight or flight response in the brain. We all have it, and that response protects us. In this first stage of understanding, we may simply focus on the world as full of physical threats and danger. If we were to ask ourselves questions, we might say, who am I? In this understanding, we can answer, I am a survivor. And who is God? God is my protector. And how do I find God? Through a mix of fear and loving devotion. This is the God portrayed in Genesis 3. In that story, God is walking through the garden, and the man and woman are hiding from him in shame because they've just eaten from the tree of life. God's feeling angry, and when he finds them, he says, see? And you can imagine a finger going up. See, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, and he banishes them from the garden. That's one perception of God. Another perception of God is concerned with achievement, and this ties to our reactive response. This God is associated with security, power, and rules, and where we may label God as King or Lord. And if we were to ask ourselves questions, we would say, who am I? I'm an individual. I'm my ego and personality. And who is God? God is almighty. And how do I find God? With awe and obedience. Now, some of those sound negative, but there are also positives to this monarchical perspective. You see, with God as a monarch, we may feel grounded with a foundation. We may feel confident and in control of our lives. I pictured a monarchical God when I heard coyotes as a child at night, and I prayed for protection. This is the God I visualized when my father took me to hear an evangelist as a teenager. I was so scared the world was going to end that night that I prayed a prayer of repentance. This is the God I called out to when I came home after a long weekend and I stepped into water in the house. That night I dropped to my knees and pleaded, God, help me. You see, in a crisis, my first response was not logical, calm knowing. I didn't sit in meditation, but I was caught up in bewilderment. And I know some of you have probably had this similar experience that I had this morning. After I got on the turnpike, I thought, where's my billfold? And what happens if I don't have my billfold? I did a little prayer right then, and obviously I made it here. So when have you simply prayed for safety or begged God for help? How do you color God in your life in moments like that? We've talked about Frida today. I want to share one of her paintings with you. Maybe we can turn off the lights. So let me just share a bit more about Frida. Frida was a Mexican artist. She suffered polio as a child, and as a young adult was severely injured in a bus accident that left her with pain most of her life. She married, divorced, and remarried the artist Diego Rivera. Now, she didn't let the pain and drama of her life stop her from being a channel of creativity. This particular painting is called The Love Embrace of the Universe, the Earth, Diego, me, and Señor Exloto. Señor Exloto is the dog in the bottom corner. I see Frida's paintings as truly authentic, as graphic, as highly symbolic of her feelings and emotions. And in this particular painting, she's painting herself almost as a daughter of the Earth Mother and the Universal Mother. And if you didn't catch it, in the center, she's holding her husband Diego like a baby. That represents her maternal role in their relationship. But you see, he guided their lives, and because he was so well known, he encouraged her art and her art career. So she painted him with the third eye of imagination or wisdom. And we see around them plants that represent life and regeneration. So did Frida see her source as life and creative imagination? I think so. So as we grow, we come to understand that God is truly spirit. Now, how does the spirit model of God relate to our self-image? Deepak Chopra links these evolving beliefs to responses that come from our mind rather than our brain. So the mind is something beyond that chemical soup in our heads. These responses look more like intuitive, creative, visionary, and sacred responses. Life becomes about a relationship with spirit. We might label the divine as energy, as source, or universal source and life. We may move from picturing God as peace to a liberator, creator, to a God of miracles and pure being. So I want to take you through some other stages related to this spirit God. When we first come to understand God as spirit, we ask, who am I? I am a silent witness to the mystery of spirit. Who is God? God is my peace. How do I find God? In meditation and silent contemplation. We may see ourselves as united to a motivating source. And as we grow, we may ask, who am I? I am a co-creator with God. How do I find God? Through inspiration. That might be inspiration in art. It might be music or dance or sports or nature or a particular cause. In a class about the book of Genesis, our Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore asked his students about their own imaginations. So you might just imagine sitting in his class. Are you seeing God in yourself? If so, then you're bringing forth good, and you will say in harmony with this divine mind, it is very good. Ultimately, we may experience the divine directly in our lives. It's as if we're one with God, one with the universe. And I realize that most of us aren't here yet, at least not all the time. In this instance, we may ask ourselves, who am I? And we can answer, I am the source for God. God expresses as me. But you see, this is true for each of us. God expresses as you. God expresses as you. At an individual point in each of us. And who is this God? God is pure being. How do we find God? Not by leaving this world, but by transcending in our understanding. Deepak Chopra, in his book, The How to Know God, talks about the soul's journey. This is how he says it. Instead of God being a vast imaginary projection, God turns out to be the only thing that is real. And the whole universe, despite its immensity and its solidity, is a projection of God's nature. The whole universe, despite its immensity and its solidity, is a projection of God's nature. So As a child, I visualized God as active when I joined in singing hymns with the breeze blowing through the church windows in the country church I grew up in. At different points in my life, like college and ministerial school, I saw my picture of the divine being painted over. And I had to choose again. Today I meditate regularly and I visualize God as peace, as guidance, as intelligence. And when I begin to think about my life, I can see that God is active as an enduring, innovative substance, as the energy that helps me overcome a situation, and that faculty at love in the midst of my relationships. So this morning I invite you to ask, how is Spirit active in my life? How do I color God? Other artists or other authors have explained how we grow in our understanding. There are critics of religion who call God an aberration, a fictional character from an old, irrelevant book. And if we listen to them, the suggestion is that God is either angry or vengeful, or God is a myth. Karen Armstrong is one of those scholars who understands that this concept simply misrepresents the diverse views of the divine. And in her massive book, The Case for God, she talks about how humanity's concepts have changed through time. From our ancient ancestors who painted animals and mythical creatures in the caves of Lascaux, France, 20,000 years ago, to our personal understanding of spirituality. Meister Eckhart, a 12th century German priest and mystic, explored the nature of the divine. He asked this question: how long will grown men and women in the world keep drawing in their coloring books an image of God that makes them sad? You and I understand that our image of God relates to our self-image. So we can ask ourselves, have I drawn an image of God that makes me sad, that comes from a place of sadness? Or have I drawn an image of God that makes me happy and peaceful? Do I interact from others from a place of sadness or anger? Or do I cooperate as happy and peaceful? How do I allow the divine to live through me? You see, we all have choices. And I encourage you as spiritual beings, as the artists of your lives, to explore how you imagine God. Color God your way. May the experience leave you cheerful.